Welcome back to Simply Suspicious, the only podcast where the phrase, "it seemed like a good idea at the time," always ends with police tape. Today's tale takes us to Oklahoma, where catfish aren't the only things being caught during a noodling trip. That's right, meth murder and Bigfoot paranoia, because nothing says fishing with friends like thinking your buddy is about to serve you up as a snack to Sasquatch. Spoiler, the only thing getting fed that day was the prison system. There are two gentlemen at the heart of this story. Larry Doyle Sanders was a 55-year-old native Oklahoman who wasn't exactly the town's success story. His background includes brushes with the law and drug problems. By the time of the events in today's story, he was a man spiraling, vulnerable to paranoia and addiction-fueled delusions. Jimmy Knighton was born in 1970. He was also a native Oklahoman who loved fishing, being outdoors, and always happy to help someone in need. He was a down-to-earth family man. He owned his own body shop for 15 years. He and his ex divorced after 20 years of marriage, but it was not a contentious divorce and they were able to co-parent very well. The two men have been friends since they were kids, and Larry's daughter and Jimmy's son were dating, so these two families are incredibly close. Larry's history with substance abuse goes back to his teen years, and by the age of 20, Larry is heavily using meth. By 2004, it is getting him into a lot of issues with law enforcement. Jimmy continues to show up and be a supportive friend as Larry is dealing with multiple run-ins with the law, not only for the drug use, but for theft and assault as well. At the time of the events in today's episode, he is in the middle of a 5-year probation sentence for bringing meth into the county jail. In July of 2022, Larry has hired Jimmy to work at Jimmy's frame and body shop. He's supposed to start work on July the 11th. Prior to starting his new job, on July the 9th, Larry and Jimmy decide that they are going to go noodling together. If you are not familiar with noodling, it is where a person will go into the water, stick their arm into a hole, and hope a fish will bite them, specifically catfish. To be fair, if someone tried to grab me from my safe place, I'd bite them too. Before they leave to go on their noodling expedition, Jimmy steps away to take a phone call, and he doesn't tell Larry who he's talking to. According to Larry, Jimmy will occasionally look over his shoulder at Larry during the call, which Larry doesn't like. They also stop at the liquor store to get some beer, because you cannot noodle without your beverage of choice, and the liquor store employee recalls that Larry appears to be under the influence of something by lunchtime. The two men leave the liquor store to head to the South Canadian River for their noodling excursion. Larry is the only one that comes back. Larry's daughter and Jimmy's son are at the house and ask Larry where Jimmy is. Larry responds, quote, "He's not coming back," end quote, and that is all he will say. The couple, understandably freaked out, called the police. The police arrest Larry on an outstanding warrant of unpaid fines and take him down to the station. He tells his daughter and the police that he killed Jimmy. The police also note that Larry appears to be under the influence of substances. When the police attempt to question Larry, he was unable to stay focused or stay still. However, in the middle of the questioning, he did state that someone was dead and that he had been the one to kill them. End of questioning for the day. On July the 10th, the sheriff's office requests the assistance of the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation for assistance into this potential homicide. Law enforcement gets themselves organized, and they are able to find people that saw Larry and Jimmy the previous day. The witnesses report that Larry said that he thought Jimmy was trying to kill him so he could, quote, sacrifice him to Bigfoot, end quote. Ah, yes, the classic Bigfoot blood sacrifice, because nothing says Sasquatch fine dining like a middle-aged Oklahoma man who just wanted to go noodling. Larry said that Jimmy quickly got a quarter of a mile ahead of him after they got to their noodling spot, and Larry noticed that there were rocks nearby. He also reported that he saw National Guardsmen, which was an individual in fatigues, but it was never clarified if it was an actual member of the military. He then shares that he sees Jimmy on top of the rocks with a tin horn, which to those of us that do not use meth probably looked a lot like a can of beer, but this is just an assumption, and that Jimmy started howling. Larry shares that at that point he was scared because he didn't know what Jimmy was calling to. Larry shares at that point, Jimmy gets off the rock and walks back across the river and tells Larry that there is a fish in the pipe. Instead, Larry sees a tall black figure behind Jimmy, and Larry says that figure is unmistakably a Sasquatch. I quote, a 12-foot tall Sasquatch 45 to 50 yards away with its toe in the water, end quote. When police asked Larry if Jimmy was aware of the creature, Larry replied, quote, "I'm pretty sure he was aware of it. He called him," end quote. Larry then determined that Jimmy was yelling to call Bigfoot over, and so Bigfoot answered that call and brought some friends. Larry explained that he saw two other Sasquatches further up the hill beyond the rocks. One was dark red and one was brown. Larry at this point connects the dots that Jimmy, the military guy, and the three Sasquatches were in ambush against him. Larry states that there were other people on ATVs down by the river and that Jimmy had begun to walk in their direction instead of back toward his own vehicle. Larry tries to get Jimmy to turn around and go to leave, and when he doesn't, this escalates Larry's meth-induced paranoia even more because Larry at this point is convinced that he is being lured into a Bigfoot trap. Larry continues on to say that he was trying to tell Jimmy that they needed to head out. They had people at Jimmy's house because there was going to be a barbecue at Jimmy's place that night, but Jimmy laughed it off and kept walking. Eventually, they did turn and head back to the truck. Larry had by this point grabbed a stick and started hitting Jimmy with it. Larry shared that he felt like they had been walking longer than was necessary to get to the truck, and when Larry began to question Jimmy, Larry claims that Jimmy turned around and knocked him to the ground. He states that they wrestled on the ground for some amount of time and that Jimmy had Larry in a chokehold a few times. Larry states he was able to attempt to gouge Jimmy's eyes out, and then he put Jimmy in a chokehold until Jimmy stopped moving. When asked by police why he did it, Larry replied, quote, "He was setting me up with the Sasquatches," end quote. He believed that Jimmy had planned to drown him and then float his body down the river to the Bigfoots to Sasquatch Village so they can eat him, and finishes that with, quote, "That's the only thing that made sense," end quote. He also stated that the Sasquatches watched him as he choked Jimmy until he stopped breathing, and then he stood up and raised his hands up to, quote, "show them he was the victor," end quote. Then he pointed to Jimmy and yelled at the Sasquatches, quote, "Weak is evil," end quote. After this declaration, Larry drew law enforcement a map to help searchers find Jimmy's body, which they do recover. The district judge rejects his motion for a speedy trial, saying prosecutors need plenty of time to review his psychological state. Larry's attorney notes that Larry will raise at the trial the defense of mental illness or sanity at the time of the offense. His attorney also sent Larry a letter advising him of the importance to meet with a psychologist and psychiatrist for the defense to help establish his case. Larry states that it's not his lawyer sending it, but an imposter. Larry writes a letter to the judge about this, and here are some excerpts I received. Okay? A letter at 4 a.m. on 9/23/22 appearing to be from my attorney. Upon viewing it, he has told me that all that's to happen and who is to conduct these events. The letter contradicts everything he said, and misspellings and wordings are on the level of a third-grade intellect. Attorney Balzarak would not allow such work to be bearing his name. On these findings, I cannot proceed with any court proceedings until I can confer with Mr. Balzarak in person. Sincerely, competently communicated, Larry Sanders. He also included an unintelligible PS and then signed the PS. The PS was longer than the letter. The judge moves forward with the trial. The prosecutor describes Jimmy as a good old country boy who went fishing with his friend at the river and never came back. Larry's attorney asserts that Larry did not form an intent to kill because he's delusional and crazy. His daughter and the daughter's boyfriend testify that he came home and told them what happened and said Jimmy is not coming back. Other witnesses testify that Larry was a known user of substances, especially meth. Lately, he had been talking a lot more about Bigfoot. He had theories, he had arguments, talking points, etc. The state prosecutor said that Larry cannot be considered insane under Oklahoma law. On the defense side, his sister testified that Larry had run out of his mental health medications in April or May of 2022 and that she had attempted to get them refilled and was told that Larry would need to meet with the doctor before they would write any more prescriptions. So Larry just said forget it and didn't make the appointment. Larry testifies in his own trial. Right before he takes the stand, he tries to fire his attorney, but they didn't let him. Larry states that his attorney, quote, should have emphasized further that he believed the investigation into this case was lacking effort and was shabby, end quote. He said on the stand that he killed Jimmy because he, quote, summoned the Bigfoot tribe to eat me. Duh, I was being set up for a sacrifice, end quote. The defense's mental health professional testifies that Larry is suffering from serious psychosis from frequent methamphetamine use. The defense tries to state that law enforcement officials did not present adequate burden of proof and that they should have tested for fingerprints, etc. The jury disagrees and finds him guilty. Larry responds that he acted in self-defense. He blamed the guilty verdict on a higher power and ancient influences. He said the truth was ignored and that Jimmy was a victim of his own actions. He then interrupted them during the sentencing. Quote, what does this have to do with anything? This is bullshit. This is ignorant, end quote. He then calls the prosecutor a stupid bitch, and the deputies lead him out of the courtroom, and the judge says that he can come back once he has calmed down. Larry refuses to return to the sentencing, and he is sentenced to life without parole. So what have we learned today? 1, if your friend suggests noodling, maybe ask a few follow-up questions like, are we catching fish or catching felonies? 2, meth and Bigfoot don't mix. And 3, if your buddy is suddenly convinced you're trying to feed him to a cryptid, that is your sign to pack up, go home, and never answer his calls again. Until next time, keep your friends close, your catfish closer, and remember, if it sounds simply suspicious, it probably ends with handcuffs. Don't forget to rate and review, as well as make sure you follow us over on IG at simply_suspicious. Bye, y'all.